Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's Q&A. I'm really excited for Retro World Expo tomorrow. I'm really looking forward to meeting a bunch of you there and hanging out with friends and all that stuff, so that'll be a lot of fun. And also, sorry this is coming a little late on a Friday night, but I spent all day working on the next video that I'm hoping to have out soon. I guess I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but for now, let's jump into the questions. First up, Semper Julio was a bit confused by some of the comments I made in the Rad2X video. So I read your full question, and I want to skip to the end first and say your whole setup's awesome. And now I'll kind of go back and hopefully clear things up for you. So Semper Julio's setup is SNES, PS2, and Saturn, all with HD Retrovision cables going into the RetroTink 2X. And then the N64, which is now unmodded with an S-video cable, soon to have an RGB mod, also goes through the RetroTink. So right then and there, that's the exact performance you would get out of the Rad2X, because the RetroTink is the Rad2X. It's the same thing, made by the same person, just the Rad2X is shrunk down to be in a cable and, configured for each console. So your setup's awesome and it is equal. What I did say was that in scenarios which games go back and forth a lot, so like the games that I showed, I'm drawing a blank now, Silent Hill and stuff. So when you go back from 240p to 480i a lot, if you had your HD Retrovision cables going directly into the component input of your flat screen, skipping the RetroTink, you might get a delay between resolution switches. And a big problem is if you're flipping into the menu to switch weapons and you go back, and now it's 4 or 5 seconds before something changes on the screen, you could be killed in game because there's the resolution switch. So by running it through the RetroTink, you have two advantages. You have the very fast resolution switching, which is usually good enough so most TVs are only delayed a second or two. It's 0 on a CRT, of course, but it's as good as you're going to get. And also the smoothing for 480i stuff, because if you go 480i directly into a flat screen, you're going to get a ton of lag versus Bob deinterlacing kind of does give it that little shaky interlaced look, but then you're sending your flat screen TV a 480p signal, so you don't get that large lag that you would from sending it an interlaced signal. And I think on some of the TVs I tested, the difference was between like 1 and 5 frames of lag or something like that. It was pretty significant. So the suggestion that I made applies to you too. It's just slightly different. So if you, with your PS2 cable, need to access a 480p PlayStation 2 game, I would unplug that from your RetroTink and go directly into your flat screen, assuming your flat screen has component video inputs. I know a lot don't. And that way you could take advantage of full 480p resolution. But my personal choice would be to leave it connected through the RetroTink for the rest of it. That way, for 240p and 480i, you're getting the advantages of using the RetroTink, which is the exact same as the Rad2X. You also mentioned what would be a good setup. If you wanted to upgrade your setup, you could take everything that you have right now and just add an OSSC instead of the RetroTink and upgrade yourself to much higher resolutions, a lot more tweaking. So that's why I said at the start, your setup's awesome and you should be very happy with it. And then you could even do, certain other things like line double 480p. I mean, there's a million things you could do with the OSSC if you wanted to upgrade, but an HD Retrovision setup is essentially, as far as quality goes, the exact same as an RGB setup. So you're good to go. I would still hold on to the RetroTink though, because obviously you have composite in S-Video, and there are certain scenarios in which the RetroTink would perform better than the OSSC. Sometimes it's just a compatibility thing, but the resolution switching that I just went on about, that would be another scenario. So you're lucky. You've done everything right. You've got an awesome setup, and should you want to upgrade to an OSSC, still hold on to your RetroTink. And it sounds like in your setup, you don't need the Rad2X at all. It's just you already have everything that you could need to take advantage of it. The only thing you might want is if you wanted a spare cable or something to bring over a buddy's house, so you don't have to lug your whole setup or something like that. But yeah, awesome setup, and I hope I could clarify everything that I said in there. Joshua Boyd did some research and found a very, very awesome thing that I didn't even realize. A few weeks ago, somebody asked about the spot of copper under the giant chip in the N64 Advanced board. And to be honest, I'd forgotten to follow up with Bordy about that. But Joshua Boyd did all the research for us. That square on the bottom of the chip is actually an exposed ground plane that's supposed to be soldered to the FPGA chip. It's for electrical connectivity and not for thermal purposes. So when you bake the boards, you have to put a little bit of the solder paste on there. And then usually when people make the really complicated boards like that, they put a bunch of solder paste on it, place all the components, and then put that in what's essentially an electrical toaster oven. And then that's the same as soldering onto it. So I didn't realize that at all. That's pretty awesome. And I'm wondering if anybody tried to hand solder that and it didn't work because of that ground plane. So that's really awesome. And that's one of those things where I have the luxury of, since I don't design boards, I just ask my friends what I'm supposed to do. But this is exactly why if you're designing your own board, you need to read the data sheets and do the research. So that was really neat. I didn't realize that at all. Thanks very much to Joshua Boyd for looking that up. And Phil, I guess you got your full answer now on why that square piece of metal is in the middle of the board. Pablo Romero said he just got a Japanese Model 1 Saturn with ARIA, the optical drive emulator. Congrats, that's awesome. And is having trouble through the LG OLED he has it connected to. So he's got a C-Sync SCART cable, a G-SCART switch light, and an OSSC with the Firebrand X settings. And everything looks good, but after a while, or if the console's reset, the image starts to shake on a vertical wavy pattern. If you turn the OSSC off and on, it works, but then I'm assuming it goes out of sync again. So there's two things that pop into mind. The first one is, how old is your SCART cable? Because it could have been purchased before we realized the exact components that needed to be in it, which is pretty easy to check. So if you go to retrorgb.com/csync.html, I have the Saturn listed here. And on the C-Sync line, you'll want a 470 ohm resistor and a 220 microfarad capacitor. And that's pretty much it. So if you got one of the older cables without the resistor, that would absolutely cause the problem. Same thing with the cap. So hopefully that could be it. A bigger problem, and what might be more likely, unfortunately, is that your OLED is having compatibility problems with the OSSC. For me personally, when I first got my OLED TV, everything was perfect, and then it automatically updated with a factory firmware update, and then I lost consistent 5x support on the OSSC. Sometimes it works fine, sometimes it doesn't. And the same update increased the amount of lag in game mode, which is kind of weird. LG is supposed to be getting better with firmware updates, not worse. But so yeah, my first suggestion would be just open up the cable, see if you see any components on the sync pin. If you have a multimeter test for resistance, if there's a cap in there, you won't be able to test on the outside. You'll have to open just the SCART side of things. And remember too that some manufacturers put the resistor on the console end. So if you open the SCART head and you see a capacitor but not a resistor on the sync line, it might be right in the console side. So do the test. And if not, if everything's fine on the cable side, then just try bumping the OSSC down to 4x, then 3x, then 2x, and see if that makes it go away. And if not, let me know, and we'll try other stuff, because if it's not one of those two things, then it would be really weird. So sorry to hear you're having trouble, but it's a pretty awesome setup, so hopefully you should be able to get it straightened out soon. Adam Brady wants to have a bunch of his consoles modded and wants to know what you should ask the modders. So I guess I'll just go through your list real quick. First, he's holding off on the front-loading NES until there's a no-cut solution. That's coming. A few people are working on it. It's going to be a little trickier because you have to desolder the entire RF module and then put this board in its place. But it'll allow you to, where the RF hole was, just plug in probably an 8-pin or 9-pin mini DIN RGB cable, and that's it. So it'll be no cut, and there should be, it should integrate all of Bordy's stuff too, so you'll get in-game reset, changing of the color palettes with the controller. It's really one board that's a huge upgrade, not just the allowing for a no cut. Then Atari 2600, 4-switch NTSC, recap, no-cut RGB mod, and I don't know if there's a region-free mod for that, because I don't think the Atari 2600 games were region locked. I believe if you play PAL ones on NTSC, you could have color issues, but I'm not an expert on the 2600, so please somebody correct me if I totally got that all wrong. And remember, too, that if you do a no-cut RGB mod, what's probably going to happen is they're going to dangle a pigtail cable out the RF hole. I personally think that's fine. Voltar's done that for me for a mod that he did for me as well. As long as you secure it so that if somebody accidentally pulls on the pigtail, you don't rip it out of the console. But yeah, that's just keep in mind that it's probably going to have to be done that way in order to get the no cut. For the SNES One chip. Recap, definitely, just because it's easy. The C11 cap replacement, as well as the one on the voltage regulator and the regulator itself. Yep. And you can get a super CIC if you want to do region free for that as well. And I can't remember if the de-jitter was able to be integrated into that. I think I would just, if you're in the UK, you should just check with Video Game Perfection and see what boards they have in stock just to make it easier. But you should be able to either do a Super CIC and an RGB mod without doing a third board. I believe there is one thing available that combines the de-jitter. And just remember, too, that the de-jitter is a fix for modern TVs through the OSSC. So if there's ever a solution going forward that has a frame buffer, you might not have needed that. But if you're playing on an OSSC today, you might. So unless, I guess a better way to word that is, do you know for a fact that your TV is incompatible with Super Nintendo? Because if it's not, then I wouldn't even bother doing the if it's compatible, I wouldn't bother doing the de-jitter mod. I would only do that if you weren't able to use your flat screen past 720p or something like that. And even then, that's really just up to you. It's not that I have a problem with the de-jitter mod. It's just a workaround for using an OSSC today. It might not even be needed 5 years from now when some other 8K scaler comes out, who knows? So just keep that into consideration. If your setup's working fine now, then you don't need it. N64 and NTSC recap. I mean, I guess I would just because, but I haven't really seen caps go bad on N64s a lot. But I mean, you might as well if you could open it once and never bother again. You said it's a later gen, so it needs the Tim Worthington mod. I would also just look into Bordy's N64 Advanced board and see if those features are stuff that you would use. So both Tim's and Bordy's can do the different bit video as well as de-blur if you're into that. But only Bordy's can do something like component video out, 480p out. With your setup, you probably don't need that at all, but take a few minutes just to kind of go through and read that and double check. So you asked what other mods are you missing? I mean, that's pretty much all I could tell. If you're not doing HDMI mods, then what you've got right there is absolutely fine. And most importantly is what you're talking about doing and all this stuff, a lot of it's just restoration, right? So to use the SNES as an example, because that's the one out of all these that I know the most about, doing a recap and doing the C11 and voltage regulator cap replacement is essentially just restoring the unit. The reason the C11 cap needs to be replaced is because it's slowly aging, and that's why you're getting all this stuff. I mean, it's one of the reasons. I'm kind of oversimplifying. Same thing with the voltage regulator, right? The 7805 in that is probably perfectly fine, but it's going to die at some point. So replacing it with a newer, updated one isn't going to hurt anything. So right there, I mean, what you're doing to these, even if you decide to do completely different mods a few years from now, you would have still needed to go through this anyway. And the fact that you're going down the road of no cut, it's still like if you do a no cut mod on the Atari 2600 and you love RGB, and 10 years from now there's a 3D 8K version of the mod, you could take it out and put the new one in, and you don't have to worry about permanent damage being done. So there's nothing that I wouldn't do that you listed. I don't really know of anything else that you could add to any of these. You said you don't want any of the optical audio for SNES. I mean, I think you're good. The only other thing I would add is if you're going through the trouble to do all of these and you're interested at all in the Genesis, do that as well, because with the triple bypass, with all of the enhancements that we've got going on now with that, it's going to be a giant difference on the OSSC, because once you start going to 5x, that's when it really starts to enhance all the little nuances of the console. So it sounds like you're doing pretty well with all this. And, obviously I would just expect to pay a fair price, because the work that you're talking about isn't easy. And even a good modder that really knows what they're doing, it's still going to be time consuming. So, don't pay $1,000 each for these, but, expect that you're going to have to pay a fair price. Well, that's it for this week. Kind of works out, I guess, though, because I still have to get ready for Retro World. I still got to pack. I still have to finish that other video. And I really hope people dig that other video. It's about bad scaling solutions. And I rewrote the thing like 5 times because I wanted to try to get through to as many people as I could. So now it's a very polite, patient, let me explain to you what's going on type of thing. I hope I don't regret going down that road. I hope I don't wish that I smashed things with a sledgehammer again. But we'll see. Well, I guess only time will tell. I'll try to have that up tonight, but the chances are slim, because I can't do a final view of the video until it's on YouTube in full resolution. And for doing these types of videos, I gotta render, then compress, then upload, then wait for YouTube. And then if there's any changes, I have to go through that whole process all over again. So even a quick change like a misspelling could take 3 hours or more. So just a little inside scoop on why some of these videos come out later than others. But anyway, as always, thanks so much for everybody that participates in these. Anybody that has any questions whatsoever, please just post in the latest Q&A post wherever it is that you support. Anything at all, and I will answer the question next week. And if I ever miss, please re-ask or let me know. I've had a few mistakes over the years where I recorded these too early and missed a question, or just a few weeks ago I missed one on YouTube because I got caught in a spam filter. Sorry again about that. So if I miss a question, please ask again. It was absolutely not intentional. And I guess that's pretty much it. So thanks so much for all your support, and I'll see you next week.